You are not failing because talent abandoned you or because destiny favored someone else. You are failing because your environment has been quietly, relentlessly programming you for smallness. Walk into a room where the light is dim, the air is stale, the calendar is a tangle of other people's priorities. And notice how ambition withers like a plant in shadow. Everything around you, friends who normalize mediocrity, feeds that rearrange your attention, a desk that invites distraction, a routine that rewards motion without progress, operates like a silent committee, deciding the limits of what you will attempt. This is not mystical, it is mechanical. Habits mirror surroundings, thoughts mirror inputs, results mirror the infrastructure you allow into your life. Edison's lab was not tidy. It was designed for the relentless pursuit of experiments. Lincoln's study was crowded with contradictions, but it was a place where stubborn decisions could be made. Ford built workshops that forced production. The point is not romantic heroism. It is engineering. Design your environment, and you will design your destiny. Listen closely, because what I am about to say will sound uncomfortably simple. Your surroundings must be coercive in favor of your future self. Coercive, not cruel. Designed so that the easiest possible action is the one that serves your highest intentions. If you want to write, the pen must be the most accessible object in your reach at the hour your mind is least offended. If you want to build a company, the customer conversation must be scheduled on a recurring block, the way payroll is scheduled. If you need to read, the book should be on your pillow, not hidden behind streaming temptation. The human mind, remarkable and lazy, will choose the path of least resistance. Your work is to shape the gradients of resistance so that they favor creation over consumption, courage over comfort, execution over planning. This is not about willpower, it is about design. Napoleon Hill taught the world to feed the mind with persistent thought. The modern application is environmental engineering. Belief that ancient engine of action is born when your environment supplies repeated, undeniable evidence. You will not summon conviction from a vacuum. You need experiments, little proofs that aggregate into unshakable conviction. So make your environment a factory of proofs. Place tiny deadlines where tiny victories are inevitable. A public post every morning that forces you to ship. A weekly call with someone you respect that obliges you to produce progress. A visible scoreboard that records progress in numbers. The ledger of success is what convinces you to risk larger bets. Carnegie did not cultivate influence by polite hope. He created systems of giving, return, and relationship that paid back trust in multiples. Build your own ledger, metrics, rituals, visible markers. When the world can see your evidence, your belief stops being fragile and starts to fund bolder decisions. Clarity breathes when the noise is removed. A blurred life is a consequence of an undisciplined environment that allows every interesting thing to elbow its way to the front. Winners dissolve ambiguity by reducing options. They take a scalpel to the menu of daily choices and remove the ones that do not lead forward. Ford did not diversify his obsession. He simplified it down to throughput and efficiency until the whole industry bent to that pressure. Your clarity requires boundaries. Boundaries on time, on inputs, on who earns your attention. Be ruthless in setting them. If your inbox is a national park of distraction, create fences, filters, strict reply windows, a rule that the first 2 hours of the day are sacrosanct. When the boundary is clear, the mind concentrates, and decisions that once felt Herculean become routine operations. Boundaries are not deprivation, they are the scaffolding of momentum. Purpose needs landscape to manifest. What is the soil your intention will grow in? Purpose without context is a sermon. Purpose with context is a plan. Define the people whose lives you intend to change, the problem you intend to solve, the measurable outcome that will prove your impact. Then tailor your environment to make that impact easy to begin. If your purpose is to teach, make a classroom, literal or digital, where you are forced to produce lessons, to receive correction, and to iterate. If your purpose is to invent, arrange a workshop that tolerates failure and rewards iteration. Disney built play into factories of imagination. He surrounded himself with collaborators who shared an appetite for iteration and invested in environments that encouraged it. Your purpose must be infrastructural. It requires allies, tools, rituals, and constraints that make the work inevitable rather than optional. Discipline is born from the same discipline of design. The person who claims they lack discipline often simply lacks a built environment that enforces it. There are two types of discipline: the kind that depends on emotion and the kind that depends on architecture. The first is brittle, the second is relentless. Convert willpower into policy. Make a rule that cannot be negotiated with mood. Make the morning your sovereign territory. Make a 3-item rule for every workday. No more, no less. And let those 3 items be the only tickets into your sense of accomplishment. Workers at Ford did not ask whether they felt like working. The assembly line structure made work non-negotiable. You must build your own assembly lines, tiny and personal, that channel energy into repeatable outputs. Policy free you from the daily tyranny of decision fatigue. Policy begets habit. Habit begets identity. Identity begets results. Action must be relentless but not random. Motion is not the same as progress. Your environment should prioritize leverage, the tasks that collapse complexity, not the tasks that merely ease your conscience. Identify the one action each day that creates disproportionate outcomes, and then make it the easiest possible action to complete. If outreach moves your venture, automate time to reach out. Templates ready, calendar windows reserved, contact lists organized. If writing moves your career, make publishing frictionless, drafts auto, saved, deadlines public. Accountability partners aligned. Efficiency is not a moral virtue. It is a strategic weapon. Use the tools that reduce friction, scripts, templates, scheduled blocks, physical arrangements that reduce the number of micro decisions between you and the work. The less your environment asks you to choose, the more it asks you to produce. Gratitude, often trivialized as soft sentiment, is a powerful calibrator when embedded into your environment. It is a signal amplifier for momentum. Keep a visible ledger of wins, no matter how small, and watch how your nervous system shifts from scarcity to investment. A whiteboard that logs completed experiments, a jar that fills with slips of progress, a weekly ritual where you name 3 advances. These are not sentimental acts. They are data curation. When your environment constantly surfaces what is working, you redirect effort toward what merits it. Gratitude becomes tactical, not mush. It becomes a reallocation engine that tells your brain where to continue investing scarce energy. Adaptability is not a personality trait. It is a trained reflex, sharpened by a responsive environment. To learn fast, you must make failure cheap and feedback immediate. Surround yourself with environments that punish ignorance quickly. Public experiments, short cycles of build, and learn mentors who tell truth without courtesy. Communities that force you to explain and thus clarify your thinking. The person who learns fastest is not the one who reads most books, but the one who places themselves in crucibles where new ideas must be applied or they will be exposed. Build those crucibles. Schedule weekly projects that demand applied learning. Teach what you learn publicly. Teaching compresses the learning curve and makes the environment an accelerant. Resilience is less about stern endurance and more about recovery design. Shock is inevitable. Collapse is optional. Your environment must include systems for repair, sleep that is non-negotiable, movement that resets your physiology, relationships that tell the truth even when it hurts, rituals that reduce cognitive noise. When failure hits, a well-designed environment provides refuge and actionable next steps. notes to review, variables to change, a trusted peer to consult. It does not permit endless rumination. It offers rehearsal, repair, and relaunch. This is what allowed Lincoln to return to the field again and again, learning from losses without being defined by them finally. Remember this: permission is not a gate that the world holds. Permission is a product you manufacture daily. The fastest way to get permission is to create environments where your small proofs are visible and your momentum is inevitable. The world will hand you opportunities when your evidence becomes louder than your excuses. Change the light in your room. Change the people who get seats at your table. Change the rituals you honor at dawn. Change the policies you impose on your day. Sculpt an environment that does not whisper permission. Make it a roar. The dream is not some fragile thing waiting for approval. It is a program waiting for the right operating system. Install it now. You have heard the diagnosis. The environment is killing your dream. But diagnoses without prescriptions are cruelty. So here is the arsenal, a sequence of concrete, ruthless interventions that will retrofit your life into a machine for possibility. Start with the simplest, least glamorous step: audit ruthlessly. For 1 week, treat your time like a ledger and your attention like currency. Track every 10-minute block. Record where you were pulled, scrolling, small talk, meetings that could have been an email, and what each block returned in measurable progress. This record is not confession, it is proof. Most people imagine they know where their time goes until they actually write it down and see the hemorrhage. Once you have the ledger, you can triage, cut the low-return drains without apology. If a relationship or routine consistently subtracts more capacity than it returns, it is not loyalty you are honoring. It is defeat. Loyalty to a vision requires the courage to rewire the present. Next, manufacture constraints that force creative work. Constraints are not limitations. They are the canvas of ingenuity. Look at the stories that make us sit up. Hemingway wrote in short bursts at dawn. He had a typewriter and a rule. The film director who must shoot a scene with a broken rig finds a solution that a cargo of resources would never have demanded. Make scarcity deliberate. Limit your work to 3 outcomes per week: 2 hours of deep work per morning, or 1 channel of public distribution. These constraints create urgency and compel you to prioritize ruthlessly. They also create the psychological condition Napoleon Hill described: a burning desire focused through precise action. Desire without constraint diffuses. Desire confined becomes molten. Surround yourself with people who are faster than you. This is not arrogance. It is intentional acceleration. You will be tempted to gather comfortable affirmers because they soothe the ego. But comfort is the anesthetic of ambition. The people who speed you up are inconvenient. They point out when you are soft. They steal your best ideas and make you chase them, and they demand accountability with a specificity that hurts. They do not ask for permission to be honest. They practice brutal kindness. Join a circle that has standards you do not yet meet and then move to meet them. Masterminds work because they replace the echo chamber with a pressure chamber. When you expose your plans to people who will not indulge you, you are forced to provide evidence, and evidence is the currency of belief. Teach what you aim to master. There is no substitute for explaining an idea to another human under the pressure of their questions. Carnegie learned to persuade by practicing conversation, not by reading rhetoric in isolation. The person who teaches compresses the learning cycle. Gaps in logic are revealed quickly, and the teacher is forced to convert vague intuition into clear process. Make public practice part of your environment. Short videos, weekly notes, a micro course that forces you to clarify. Public accountability is not vanity. It is an accelerant. It creates a visible trail of tiny proofs that the market, the network, and your future self can inspect. It makes belief less sentimental and more ledger, like decide what you will say no to. The grammar of no is the grammar of progress. Every yes is a tax on your attention. Some taxes are worth paying, most are not. Say no to the invitation that flatters you but does not advance you. Say no to the project that will give you a line on your arfe sum fe but not a change in your capabilities. When you master the art of refusal, you preserve the sacred runway of your best hours. The people who become great do not have more days. They protect the quality of the small hours they have. Build a simple script for refusal and practice it until it feels like a muscle, polite, precise, irreversible. This keeps your environment from repopulating with the very distractions you cut away. Make your goals sensory and public. Clarity without fidelity is vapor. Write down not only the metric, a revenue number, a word count, a customer target, but the sensory detail that convinces the body this future exists. The hum of the office when the first hire starts, the smell of coffee at 5 a.m., the first print of your book on your palm. Then post that image where you will see it during the small hours of doubt. Publicize the goal to a small but rigorous cohort who will measure you. The mind resists abstract futures. It obeys present, tense evidence. When your goal is both sensory and witnessed, your nervous system begins to account for it as inevitable rather than optional. Finance your future like a strategist, not a gambler. Money is not moral judgment. It is leverage. Create a two-account model, one for runway and one for growth experiments. The runway account keeps you alive long enough to iterate. The growth account is the small, intentional fund you spend on ruthless experiments. Prototype runs, market tests, coaching that costs but accelerates your rhythm. Resist either extreme, hoarding that suffocates momentum, or reckless spending that burns option value. Make every expense a hypothesis. Does this spend increase the likelihood of proving a high leverage idea? If the answer is no, do not buy it. Treat your budget as a weekly protest against the tyranny of impulse. Design rituals that teach your body when you are in production and when you are in rest. The brain loves signals. A man who puts on a jacket before deep work will begin to associate the jacket with focus. Soon the jacket itself will reduce friction. Find your ritual stack. A short physical cue, 2 minutes of breath or cold exposure, a set time of day, and a task that must be completed before any other reward is permitted. Rituals are small technologies of identity. They automate the first step of action. When you can no longer rely on the mood to begin, rely on the ritual. The ritual is not superstition. It is habit deployed like infrastructure. Cultivate an ecosystem of small wins. The difference between hope and momentum is visible progress. Build a scoreboard that forces transparency, weekly targets, daily checkpoints, and a red line for missed commitments. Make the scoreboard public within a trusted circle. Humans respond to visible accountability. We will bend toward the record when shame or pride is a ledger we must settle. The scoreboard is not a tyrant if used wisely. It is feedback. It tells you where your systems are leaking and where they are amplifying. Fix the leaks first. Amplify what works next. Practice selective exposure to information. Information is a weapon when curated. It is a narcotic when consumed promiscuously. The modern mind becomes a collage of half-formed ideas because it is fed on an endless drip of headlines. Fix this by creating an input diet, an hour of high-quality books per week, 2 curated newsletters, a single podcast for deep work, and a weekly synthesis session where you convert inputs into experiments. The goal is not to know more, it is to change more. Knowledge without application is vanity. Convert intake into output, and then measure the effect. Finally, create a culture of fast mercy and faster iteration around yourself. When mistakes occur, and they will, do not ritualize them into identity. Treat them as inventory. Count them, analyze them, price them, and restock accordingly. The companies that dominate markets are those that tolerate the highest rate of useful failure and the quickest cleanup. Build that tolerance into the environment by rewarding experiments regardless of outcome, provided lessons are logged and shared. Celebrate the act of testing, not the hypothetical success. This keeps fear from fossilizing into inaction. Change your environment, and you change the chemistry of decision making. The world is neutral. It does not conspire to keep you small, but it passively rewards the path of least resistance. If you refuse to engineer the gradients, the path of least resistance will be the comfortable garden of smallness. Be deliberate. Prune the inputs. Amplify the stimuli that serve you. Schedule constraints that force ingenuity, and surround yourself with people who are rarely satisfied. Build public rituals that make your work visible, and treat setbacks as laboratory data. There is no tragedy in failure, when failure is a scheduled laboratory rather than a public verdict. Start today with one brutal audit, one constraint imposed, and one person recruited who will not flatter you. Do those three things and watch how quickly the scaffolding of your life begins to favor more audacious action. The environment that once killed your dream becomes, with discipline and design, the engine that propels it forward. You have rebuilt the scaffolding. Now you must populate it with the cargo that actually moves the world. Mindset sharpened into strategy, beliefs cemented into habit, and a relentless appetite for evidence. There is a lie softly told to every ambitious person that motivation will arrive when the conditions are right. That lie is the polite cousin of procrastination. Motivation is not a mist that falls from the heavens. It is the byproduct of visible progress and deliberate pain. The morning you wake before your usual hour and write the first embarrassing draft. The nervous system registers a new truth. You are capable of discomfort for a creative end. That small reprogramming compounds. Every time you choose a hard, visible action over an easy, flattering illusion, you deposit credibility into your future self's account. This is how belief builds from biology, not from pep talks, but from repeated, measurable acts that alter neurotransmitters and narratives simultaneously. Think of belief as ballast. It keeps your ship oriented when storms arrive. But ballast is heavy only if it is earned through work, not imagined through wishful thinking. Picture a crucible where thought becomes muscle. In that crucible, the raw material is your daily decisions. Replace vague ambitions with a carved list of non-negotiable tasks whose completion is verifiable. The difference between "I want to be a writer" and "I will publish 500 words at 6 a.m. every weekday" is the difference between prayer and engineering. One is sentiment, the other is a machine. Build the machine in public. The fear you feel about exposure is the smoke that signals growth. Edison accepted the stench of failure in the lab because the lamp was worth the smell. Make your experiments public. Post the ugly first drafts. Talk about the early missteps. Show the half-broken products. And watch the world reward courage with feedback and the stubborn with relevance. Public practice accelerates learning because it forces you to convert private assumptions into testable assertions. Your next promotion, your next sale, your next permission will arrive from the accumulation of tiny public proofs, not from polished secrecy. Language is not innocent. The sentences you use shape the circuits of your action. When you say, "I'll try," you purchase an exit ramp for failure. When you say, "I will," you sign a contract with a future that must reconcile with you. Replace soft verbs with declarative verbs and watch your calendar obey the grammar of your speech. Napoleon Hill insisted that desire backed by auto-suggestion rewires the mind. Today, that auto-suggestion is the repetitive command you give yourself through speech, notes, and small rituals. Use present tense. Use active voice. Use terms that force a response. Publish, call, ship, deliver. Speak as if you have already signed the checks your future self will cash. Your words will summon the energy to match them because the body does not like cognitive dissonance. It will seek congruence between speech and action. Do not confuse intensity with precision. There is an epidemic of frantic productivity masquerading as meaningful work. Busy calendars, endless meetings, frantic multitasking that yields nothing but exhaustion. Leverage is found in subtraction, not addition. Identify the single project this quarter that, if it succeeds, would change everything. Then reverse engineer the micro. Steps that necessitate daily action toward that project. Create a moat around that project, sacred time, financial runway, minimum viable outputs, and defend the moat with the same vigilance you would use to protect your reputation. The winners of history did not scatter their force. They focused it until it produced effects that seemed disproportionate. Ford did not distribute his labor across many impossible factories. He optimized one process until the cost structure of the entire industry bowed. This is what focused force looks like in modern life: the willingness to be boringly consistent, to choose the long lever, and to execute it until the compounding effect makes miracles mundane. Gratitude is not a conclusion. It is intelligence. It is the lens that turns scarcity into opportunity by revealing the assets you already control. Keep a visible ledger of what works and treat it like a map. The map will show you routes of least resistance to more progress. When you are grateful in this tactical sense, when you can point to the people, the skills, and the tiny systems that move you forward, you become a better allocator of energy. You stop pouring fuel into black holes of distraction and start directing it to high-return experiments. Gratitude also reorients relationships. When you demonstrate that you notice the gifts around you, people reciprocate with trust and resources. Carnegie's generosity was strategic, not sentimental. He invested social capital where the return would compound. You should do the same. Gratitude as investment, not as sentimentality. Resilience is not a heroic posture. It is an engineered process. Breakdowns will happen. People will come at you with criticism disguised as concern. Markets will shift. Bodies will fail. Systems will glitch. The resilient person does not pretend pain is absent. They design for repair. Build a diagnostic protocol for setbacks. Isolate the variables. Measure what changed. Hypothesize the single variable with the largest causal effect. Test a correction quickly, and then decide whether to scale or discard. This is the laboratory method applied to life. It removes drama and leaves procedure. The faster you turn failure into an experiment and run the next iteration, the less likely you are to be paralyzed by fear. The greatest leaders are not the ones who avoid failure. They are the ones who organize their teams and systems. So failure is informative, fast, and low in waste. Learning is the oxygen of adaptability, but learning without application is theater, a pleasant performance with no consequences. Force yourself into learning loops where knowledge must be applied within a week in a manner that is visible. Teach what you learn publicly, because teaching is a crucible for clarity. When you must explain a concept to an actual person, the fog of vague understanding burns away quickly. Create weekly micro projects that require you to implement one new skill in an environment that measures outcome. This approach compresses the learning curve and converts abstract competence into concrete advantage. The future favors those who can add value faster than the rules change. That means the cadence of learning must outrun the cadence of change. Your network is not a trophy case. It is a dynamic engine. Relationships are not about collecting contacts. They are about increasing each other's velocity. Seek interactions that create multiplicative outcomes, introductions that lead to new experiments, feedback loops that cut through your blind spots, partnerships that allow resources to move where they will produce the most return. Reciprocity must be immediate and credible. Give the best you can before you ask for the best you need. The rule is simple and brutal generosity. Without expectation breeds trust. Trust produces optionality. when you are known as the person who gives without fanfare and who delivers when stakes are high, permission becomes a liquidity you can call upon whenever necessary. Time is the only scarce resource that never replenishes. Respect it like capital. Build calendar defenses, blocks that will not be negotiated away by convenience, interruptions, or the flattering noise of social approval. Guard your mornings as sacred deposits for the craftsman's work. Imagine each morning as a bank where interest compounds. Withdrawals are allowed only for investments that demonstrably increase your principal. Those small daily investments, unspectacular, consistent, become the compound interest that funds opportunity. People who win in life are not those who scream about hustle. They are the ones who steward time like an heirloom and spend it on work that escalates options. Finally, remember that legacy is fabricated by the daily ledger of integrity. Reputation is not forged in the great speeches, but in the quiet acts that create trust. Showing up when you promised, returning calls, doing the small jobs with unusual care. The person who is consistent in invisible acts will one day find visible doors opening. This is not moralizing. It is strategic. People bet on patterns. If your pattern is reliable competence mixed with generous reciprocity, permission will become a currency you can spend freely. The paradox is beautiful. By making your life a machine that generates evidence, you remove the need to beg for permission. The world will hand you the keys, not because it owes you, but because you have proven invisible, repeatable steps that you will honor them. Take that truth and act on it now. Make a decision that is public, measurable, and irreversible within 24 hours. The scream of your new environment will drown out the old whispers that kept you small. Now that the scream of your new environment has started to drown out the old whispers that kept you small, understand this. Transformation is not polite. It is a series of violent, quiet edits. The surgical removal of excuses, the repeated application of modest cruelties to comfort. You will be tempted to soften the work with rituals that look like progress, but are merely motion, motivational playlists, elaborate planners, inspirational bookmarks you never open. Those things feel good because they mimic the structures of change without asking for the price. Real change asks for scars. It asks for nights when you choose the draft over the party, for mornings when the alarm is a verdict, not a suggestion, for conversations where you say no and mean it. This is not moralizing. It is arithmetic. If you want a future that looks different than your past, you must shift the inputs that calculate your days. The compound interest of a single consistent choice, write, call, pitch, ship, will outrun bursts of frantic inspiration every time. Look at the lives you admire and notice the common denominator. They are crowded with small, non-negotiable acts. Lincoln read until his eyes bled for the sake of better laws. Edison embraced thousands of failed filaments because each failure was a proof, not a tragedy. When you make a promise to yourself and then keep that promise repeatedly, you build a spine. That spine does not show up in a single heroic act. It accumulates in the ledger of kept promises. Start by picking a promise so small your present self cannot plausibly excuse it. 500 words at dawn, 1 customer call each afternoon, a 10-minute walk at noon. Make the promise public to one person who will care more about your habit than about your feelings. The social friction of exposure will give your future self a nudge when mercy is tempting. This is how the invisible scaffolding of character is built. Not through grand declarations, but through tiny, stubborn proofs. Belief is not an abstract luxury. It is currency exchanged for action. But belief must be purchased with evidence. Give yourself micro wins that are visible and repeatable. A public blog post, a signed contract with conditions, a saved prototype. These are not trophies. They are receipts. They prove that you can take an idea out of your head, package it, and submit it to reality. Every receipt increases the credit line of your courage. Carnegie did not wake up influential. He created a track record of reciprocal value. The modern entrepreneur does not beg for trust. They build it by demonstrating competence in public. The paradox is brutal. The more you show, the more you are trusted. The more you are trusted, the fewer permissions you need. Permission becomes a byproduct, an accounting consequence, because you have already earned the right through visible results. Clarity is the scalpel that turns chaos into progress. Without it, you will fracture energy across 1,000 pretty things and end up exhausted and undelivered. Clarity begins with ruthless prioritization. Ask yourself a question that will not tolerate vagueness. What is the one objective that, if completed in the next 90 days, would make everything else easier or irrelevant? Then commit to that single metric with the kind of devotion usually reserved for family. Reverse. Engineer daily habits that feed it directly. If your objective is to ship a product, your day must be an orchestra tuned to production. Customer calls, prototype hours, a fixed publishing rhythm. The rest of the noise becomes background static. The genius of focus is that it manufactures momentum. Momentum, once visible, recruits resources, time, money, people. Because it looks like inevitability, you will need a vocabulary of discipline that is elegant and brutal. Replace wishy-washy promises with operational rules. Rules are merciless because they do not negotiate with excuses. A rule can be as simple as, I will not check social media before completing my first core task. A rule can be as elaborate as, I will respond to email only between 2:03 p.m. after 2 hours of creative work. The point is to convert moral arguments into logistical ones. When your day is governed by rules, you save the expensive currency of willpower for the inevitable crises. Rules free you from the tyranny of feeling. They convert fleeting desire into durable outcomes. Napoleon Hill advised the mind to be fed with persistent thought. Now you feed it with persistent context. Structures that make thought produce output. Action without learning is noise. Learning without action is vanity. Combine both into a loop. Decide, act, measure, learn, repeat. The speed of that loop determines how quickly you will pivot from amateur to practitioner. Make experiments cheap and rapid. The tech founders who move fastest do not wait for polished presentations. They ship something imperfect and watch what the market does. The market gives feedback with brutal honesty. Clicks, sign-ups, purchases. Use that honesty. Convert every reaction into data. When a launch fails, treat it as a laboratory result. What did customers actually do versus what you predicted? What single variable, if changed, would have most likely altered the outcome? Test that variable next week. The rhythm of small experiments built on public data is how empires are formed. Not overnight, but day by stubborn day. Cultivate environments where truth is the currency and comfort is taxed. Surround yourself with people who will tell you things you do not want to hear but must. The comfortable circle will flatter your ego and starve your progress. The pressure circle will make you accountable. And accountability is the fastest path to competence. Find mentors who are willing to be inconvenient on your behalf. Find peers who will set deadlines and then enforce them. The mastermind is not a social club. It is a pressure vessel. When you are in a room where standards are higher than your current abilities, you will either rise or leave. Both outcomes are useful. Rise and you accelerate. Leave and you are exposed to the necessary discomfort that prompts change. Gratitude is not optional. It is a lever. It is an act of strategy when used to map leverage points. Identify 3 resources you possess that could be used more aggressively: skills, contacts, small sums of capital, and redirect them with surgical intent toward a single objective. Gratitude sharpens perception. It allows you to see assets you overlooked while mourning what you lack. Carnegie's generosity was strategic. He invested social capital where the return would compound. Do the same with your gratitude. Be generous in ways that create reciprocal advantage. Reciprocity builds trust. Trust builds permission. Permission yields options. This is a chain reaction that starts with noticing and ends with mobility. Resilience is designed, not inherited. It is assembled from routines that reduce the cost of recovery. Sleep, movement, honest friends who will call you by your faults, and rituals that clear cognitive clutter are not luxuries. They are maintenance. When systems break, the resilient person does not wail. They diagnose and repair, create a playbook for setbacks, immediate triage. What broke? A 30-minute brainstorming to identify the likeliest cause, a next step test, and a fixed timeline for review. Limit rumination, maximize iteration. Recovery must be faster than relapse. When setbacks are processed as data rather than drama, the pace of comeback accelerates and fear loses its power. Finally, remember this truth with the kind of clarity that crashes your complacency. The world responds to evidence, not intent. Intent is wind, evidence is weight. If you want the world to hand you opportunities, make your evidence heavier. Public wins, visible metrics, a streak of kept promises that cannot be ignored. Reduce friction between idea and evidence. Lower the cost of trying so often that trying becomes your default. And when permission finally arrives, do not treat it like validation. Treat it like fuel. Use it to build faster, not to justify slower comfort. The loudest permission you will ever need will come from the steady accumulation of small, ruthless acts. Start today. Make one promise you cannot plausibly weasel out of. Publish the proof, and then choose another. Move until the environment no longer kills your dream but carries it forward.